Welcome to Constitution Hall Pass. I'm Tisha Canales from the National Constitution Center in Philadelphia. Today, we're talking about the story of Earth Day. Here at the center, our exhibits and our staff talk a lot about many great Americans. We highlight active citizens from the past and present, and how we all can be active members of our community and of the United States. In this episode, we're going to see how we all play a role in the global community, and how that unites us all as citizens of the planet Earth. So let's find out how you too can earn your global citizenship and do your part in taking care of the world around you. We're in Signers Hall, where the National Constitution Center has 42 life-size statues which capture the exact moment of the signing of our Constitution. When these men signed the Constitution on September 17, 1787, they didn't just create a new government for our country. They made sure that taking care of the United States was all of our responsibilities. And it's not just the government they were talking about. We're also responsible for taking care of our environment. So what does that have to do with citizenship? Well, think about it. Part of being a citizen is taking care of your community. Keeping it clean and green helps everyone enjoy a better life. And just like other responsibilities that come with being a citizen, being environmentally friendly involves everyone working together for the good of the whole community. The story of Earth Day is a great way to look at that. April 22nd, 1970 was a very special day for Americans. It was the first celebration of Earth Day, which is now a civic holiday which we celebrate as a nation. We're going to use this occasion to explore the history of the environmental movement in America. We'll head out into the wilderness to learn about the first American environmentalists and show you the natural beauty which they wanted to preserve for future generations. We'll learn about the creation of the National Park Service and the efforts of a famous First Lady to make our highways beautiful and save our natural resources. And we'll look at some easy ways that you can be a good citizen and go green every day. So let's check out Earth Day today and get our green on. Ideas for protecting the environment go all the way back to our founding fathers. When Thomas Jefferson set out to write the Declaration of Independence in 1776, he found that he couldn't do it at his home in Philadelphia. The city was too crowded, and frankly, it smelled really bad. Horse manure, raw sewage in the roads, outhouses. It wasn't a pleasant place to be on a summer day in the 18th century. So Jefferson went out into the countryside to do his writing, because he knew that being close to nature would allow him to find the words he really wanted to say. But it wasn't just the problem of writing the Declaration that had to do with nature. A terrible epidemic swept through Philadelphia in the 1790s, and it led to some big changes about how people in Philadelphia viewed nature. The disease was yellow fever. It's a nasty sickness to have. It causes fever, chills, and it makes you throw up. And when it isn't treated, it can be fatal. In the 1790s, yellow fever hit Philadelphia hard. Philadelphians were used to using their waterways as a dumping ground for trash and human waste. Because of this, the disease spread like wildfire, and nearly 10% of the population died. Everyone was affected by yellow fever. Panicked by the thousands of deaths in the city, many people fled to a cleaner environment, even the president. George Washington abandoned the presidential mansion, located at the corner of 5th and Market Streets, to move to a rural area known as Germantown, which is a part of the city today. Americans have always looked forward to the next frontier. Sometimes it's to escape disease, poverty, or other restrictions. Sometimes it's just to find ourselves someplace new. It's something we've always liked to do, just move out and find new land. After all, our country is huge. And back then, we didn't ever imagine there'd be enough people to fill our borders. But people soon realized that they would need a better solution than just leaving places like Philadelphia. After all, some people couldn't afford to leave or didn't want to. So they came up with a different solution. They figured out that disease was spreading really quickly because of polluted water supplies. That's probably the most important requirement for any place where people live. The only thing that your body needs more than water is oxygen. The city decided to do something about polluted water. So they came up with a plan to provide safe drinking water to the whole city. The first waterworks in Philadelphia was built on the present-day site of City Hall in 1801. This was later replaced by the Fairmount Waterworks on the Schuylkill River in 1815. To ensure the purity of the water coming through these works, the city gradually took control of all the land bordering the river, and they made it so that people couldn't build on the water or dump their stuff into it. It worked. And today, because of that act, Philadelphia's Fairmount Park is one of the largest and most beautiful park spaces in the entire country. At the beginning of the 19th century, a group of thinkers took a new approach to caring for the environment. They called themselves transcendentalists. They believed that nature allowed people to build their own personal perspectives on the world. And in that great American tradition, they wanted people to go on out and experience it on their own. To talk more about those people, let's take a little trip to a small town in New England where some big ideas took root. Welcome to Walden Pond. Just outside of Concord, Massachusetts, this is the site of Henry David Thoreau's experiment in living with nature. For 2 years, 2 months, and 2 days, Thoreau lived in a small cabin. He isolated himself to see if living off the land could teach him more about himself and about human beings in general. The book that he wrote, called Walden, is a great way to look at a big idea which Thoreau and a lot of other writers were thinking about at this time, the notion of transcendentalism. The transcendentalists thought that the best way to understand the world around them was to observe it, think about it, and see how it made them feel about themselves. Henry David Thoreau figured that he'd try that little experiment here at Walden Pond. He worked the land, all the while reflecting on the meaning of life. Thoreau's experiment brought him closer to nature. It definitely taught him how to take care of himself. Do you think you could survive like him? Alone and living off the land? It made him realize how valuable it was for humans to come to understand their place in the world. In Walden, Thoreau contrasted the simple pleasures of life in the woods with the crowded, bustling, and sometimes confusing towns where, he thought, people lost the sense of who they were and seemed to disappear into the masses. For Thoreau, it was important to preserve nature so that people could come to better understand themselves. Thoreau figured that nature was the way mankind could reconnect with their true self and not lose their identity. And his experience gave him the idea that going back to nature could remind people how to survive using their own skills and learning how to think for themselves. He used the lessons he learned here from living at Walden to stand up against government practices which he found unjust, like slavery and the Mexican War. Nature reminded Thoreau of the power and the voice of the individual. Thoreau even came up with an idea for alternative energy, 120 years before the first plans were made for solar and wind power. Listen to what he wrote in 1843.
Consider the value of the wind, the tide, the waves, and the sunshine. The wind is an almost incalculable power at our disposal, yet how trifling the use we make of it.
When you think about it, Thoreau and the Transcendentalists were some of the first environmentalists in American history. The idea of using nature to learn more about ourselves was an early example of what environmentalism is all about, preserving natural spaces to benefit everyone. As the Industrial Revolution continued and towns and cities grew even bigger, the seeds planted by the Transcendentalists would grow to inspire future environmental activists. And these activists would help to create a system of parks which preserve natural beauty for all of us. Let's hit the road again and find out more. Our country has all kinds of incredible natural environments. We have beaches and lowlands in the east, Great Lakes and Great Plains in the Midwest, the mighty Rocky Mountains and vast deserts of the western states, and beautiful rivers, forests, and hills all across the nation. Just think of the words to America the Beautiful, written by Katharine Lee Bates after she climbed Pikes Peak in Colorado in 1893. Can you imagine looking out on that beautiful country and how it would make you feel? Bates was so inspired by what she saw that she wrote one of our most famous national songs. When you examine the natural world around us, it's easy to see why it's an environment worth saving. These are the blessings of liberty that we Americans hold so dear. Not just our government and our people, but our land, water, and skies. One American artist, George Catlin, used his talents to capture not only the hearts, but the minds of the American public, and inspired a movement to set aside natural environments for all Americans to enjoy. Catlin was well known for his paintings of native peoples during the early part of the 19th century. In 1832, Catlin was taking a trip through what is now North and South Dakota. Struck by the natural beauty of the place, Catlin was also upset by the idea that someday westward expansion would bring an end to the wilderness and the native peoples who lived there. Catlin imagined that it would be great if our government set aside areas which were especially beautiful for all of the public to enjoy. This was not an isolated idea. Writers, artists, even the wealthy were escaping to nature, and they were escaping the polluted urban centers of the Industrial Revolution, which transformed our country's economy and landscape forever. Factories and skyscrapers sprang up in our cities, which were growing larger and larger. But the crowded cities had problems with pollution and poverty. Seeking to escape city life, business owners like the Rockefellers purchased land in rural areas, like the Adirondack Mountains here in upstate New York. We're only a few hours away from New York and Boston, but it feels like another world here. Industrial pollution didn't always spare these sanctuaries of nature, and wealthy landowners soon realized that environments like these should be preserved, both as an escape for themselves from city life and as an important part of the country that might not be around forever. People began to see these sites as national treasures, and soon the first official national park was established at Yellowstone on March 1st, 1872. President Ulysses S. Grant signed an act which carved out a huge chunk of land in what's now Wyoming, Montana, and Idaho. That chunk of land, Yellowstone National Park, was filled with lakes, canyons, mountain ranges, and all kinds of plants and animals, and it became the first national park in the world. Teddy Roosevelt expanded our nation's commitment to conservation during his presidency, which lasted from 1901 to 1909. Roosevelt believed that saving our natural resources was important for national security, as it would ensure the long-term health of the United States. In his time in office, he created 5 new national parks, 18 national monuments, 150 forest reserves, and 51 federal bird reservations. Yellowstone and other national parks became part of a larger system when the National Park Service was created in 1916. President Woodrow Wilson signed an act of Congress which established the Park Service to preserve the natural and cultural resources of the parks in order to educate and inspire Americans in the present and the future. Because there was so much scenic land in the West, most of the early parks were located in that region. Soon, the Park Service was expanded to take care of historical parks and national monuments all across the country, like the National Constitution Center's home in Philadelphia Independence National Historic Park.
Today, the National Park Service manages lands which cover 84 million acres. They've got national parks, monuments, battlefields, recreation areas, scenic rivers and trails, and even the White House. And they have almost 140,000 volunteers to help them run these sites. So maybe someday you can volunteer with the Park Service and help preserve our nation's environments. In the second half of the 1900s, new threats to the environment led people to speak out about the newly recognized dangers of our ways. In 1962, Rachel Carson released her book, Silent Spring. The book warned that the pesticides which the Department of Agriculture was spraying on crops were poisoning people and making them sick.
Carson told her readers that the public had a right to know about the dangers of chemical contamination and that the government had a responsibility to protect its citizens. Carson even argued that if the founding fathers had known about the dangers of chemical contamination, they would have written about it in the Bill of Rights. Silent Spring helped Americans and other people around the world understand the importance of modern ecology. Other influential Americans helped the environment in their own way. Lady Bird Johnson, who was the first lady while her husband Lyndon was president, loved the natural beauty that you can find in everyday places across America.
During her time as First Lady, she created the Committee for a More Beautiful Capital to make Washington, D.C. a model for the whole country to follow. But she didn't just want to beautify things. She thought that that word didn't sound important enough for the work that she wanted to get done, like making sure that Americans had access to clean air, water, and roadsides, and safe places for their trash to go.
Lady Bird planted flowers on the National Mall, hoping to inspire others to do the same all over the country. She inspired Congress to pass laws to help the environment, like the Wilderness Act of 1964 and the Beautification Act of 1965, which is still known as Lady Bird's Bill.
That law called for limiting the number of billboards along the sides of our highways, restricting ugly junkyards from being built along the roadside, and setting aside money for scenic development along the roads. Have you ever noticed colorful wildflowers planted along the highway when you're riding in the car? That comes from Lady Bird's Bill.
She also educated people about the value of locally grown plants. She encouraged people to plant wildflowers, which were native to the areas where they were being placed. Using native plants meant more than just a beautiful landscape. Native plants help to conserve water, provide natural environments for local wildlife, and protect the local soil. And there's something about native plants which make us feel connected to our homes. As Lady Bird said herself, they give us a sense of where we are in this great land of ours. The creation of the National Park Service and Lady Bird's work did a lot to protect our environment. But new threats emerged to put our environment at risk. And a new group of environmentalists created a day of awareness to bring attention to environmental issues. And we celebrate it every year. Let's talk about the story of Earth Day and what you can do to make your community more green. Earth Day actually got its start after an environmental disaster.
For years, companies had been drilling for oil in the ocean just off the beaches in Santa Barbara, California. The people of Santa Barbara didn't really like the offshore drilling, but had to tolerate it because offshore drilling meant jobs for the area. But on January 28, 1969, a problem with one of the offshore drilling platforms led to thousands of gallons of oil pushing up through cracks in the ocean floor, bubbling up to the surface, and washing onto the beaches.
The Santa Barbara oil spill devastated the area. Greasy slicks of oil covered beaches all over Southern California. Thousands of birds, fish, and sea mammals died, and the pollution contaminated many of the beaches. People who were concerned about the environment used this spill to get people's attention focused on the need to protect our environment. And one government official used it to create a new holiday dedicated to saving the planet.
Gaylord Nelson was a senator, not from California, but from Wisconsin. Concerned with environmental issues, Nelson realized that a lot of people were paying attention to the environment after the Santa Barbara spill. Senator Nelson understood that the anti-war movement had gathered people together to work for a common goal, and he wanted to use that same kind of energy to get people focused on the environment.
So the next April, Nelson and other people in the environmentalist movement chose the date of April 22nd to mark America's first Earth Day. Earth Day saw 20 million Americans protesting all across the country for a healthy and sustainable environment. The rallies drew the public's attention to the need to protect our planet, as many Americans still remember the Santa Barbara spill and the devastation it had caused the California coast just 1 year before. Earth Day contributed to the creation of the Environmental Protection Agency, or EPA, and the passage of important laws like the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, and the Endangered Species Act.
Earth Day would get bigger and bigger over time. In 1990, the 20th anniversary of the first Earth Day, over 200 million people in 141 countries worked to raise awareness of environmental issues. And President Bill Clinton awarded Gaylord Nelson the Presidential Medal of Freedom to recognize his part in the creation of Earth Day. And on Earth Day 2010, 40 years after Earth Day was first celebrated, Hollywood's James Cameron, the guy who directed the movies Titanic and Avatar, started a movement to get 1 million new trees planted all around the world.
So what can you do to make a difference in your community? There are some pretty easy things that you can do to have an impact on the environment, like recycling. Many communities in our country offer recycling, whether it's picked up by a crew or sorted at a drop-off facility. You can recycle all kinds of things, like plastics, paper, and some kinds of metal. Appliance stores even recycle old electronics and computer parts. If your town doesn't have a recycling program, you can contact the town council or the mayor and ask to have one started up. You can also make easy changes around the house to lower your family's energy use.
Switching from old-style incandescent light bulbs to newer CFL or LED bulbs will cut down on the amount of electricity your family uses and save you money on your energy bill. It's also smart to pay close attention to how much you run your heat and your air conditioning, since both of those use up a lot of energy. And your family can save up to 5% on heating costs for every degree you lower your heat. And it's a good idea to turn off the lights, the TV, and other electronic appliances when you're not using them. Maybe you and some friends could sponsor a park cleanup day where you pick up litter and make sure that your public spaces are in good condition. Your class could work together to plant a tree or two in your town to make the area a little bit greener. Your school might even host a recycling drive where you collect recyclable materials to be dropped off at a facility. These are all easy ways that you can make a difference and help protect our environment.
And remember, it ties in perfectly with the idea of being a good citizen locally, nationally, and globally. The signers of the Constitution may not have had to worry about oil spills and plastic bottles, but they knew that in order for the United States to become great, it had to depend on the American people working together. It's the same way with going green. The environment is here for all of us to use responsibly. So that means that we have to work together to protect it. We can make our homes more efficient, our communities cleaner and more enjoyable, and the environment healthier by pitching in to help in ways both big and small. It's up to us to make it happen.
So this Earth Day, why don't you and your family and friends try out some of these easy ways to make the environment a better place? It'll help to make sure that our blessings of liberty are here for future generations to enjoy. And it'll make your community a more enjoyable place in the present. And it's a great way to be an active citizen.
Thanks for watching the Story of Earth Day on Constitution Hall Pass. You can find out more ways to go green and learn more about our history and our government by visiting www.constitutioncenter.org/education and by adding us as a friend on Facebook. And try our free NCC app to get great information about the Constitution and our history right on your iPhone, iPad, or iPod Touch. From the National Constitution Center in Philadelphia, I'm Tasha Canales. See you next time on Constitution Hall Pass.